So let's talk about Laravel Pennant, which is a feature flag package that allows you to define features throughout your application. You can control when they're enabled, when they're disabled, who they apply to, under what conditions, and what do you want that feature to essentially do. And I don't think this package has gotten enough coverage. Even though it's simplistic in its nature, this is a very, very powerful feature. If you've been building apps long enough and you're always evolving and you're always coming out with new things, this will be the package you want to use to control that behavior. But to get started, since this is the first video of a series, what I'm going to show us how to build is a way to adjust Laravel's API rate limiter to be based on specific users that we will call a commercial customer. But before we can really get going, we're going to have to get Laravel Pennant installed. So on the screen, I have Laravel's documentation for Laravel Pennant. I'm going to go into PHP Storm, and I'm going to install Laravel Pennant. We'll give that a second. Then I'm going to run the command here, which will it'll essentially allow us to publish Pennant's configuration, which we're not going to really do anything crazy with that, we're actually probably not going to touch that at all here. And so as you know, notice here, it's brought in the config file, it's brought in some migrations. And so with that said, we need to then migrate our database. If we switch over and I refresh, you'll see now we have a features table. And of course, there's nothing really in it. And what I need to do is create and actually before I create them, what we're going to do is we're going to go into the user migration, and we're just going to add a Boolean here that says commercial. And we'll say it's index, but we're going to say it defaults to false. I'm also going to go into my user model and add this to my fillable property. And this will make sense as we work our way through this. So we have this, and let's just do PHP artisan migrate refresh. I need to go into the database seeder here, and we're just going to create just one user here. So we'll say PHP artisan. Forgive me, people are apparently street racing down the street. So we've seeded the database, and if we go in here, we have one user who is not a commercial customer because that's how it works by default, and you see we don't have any features yet. Now, in the documentation for Laravel Pennant, they do show an example where you can define this in the app service provider. I'm not going to run with that example in this particular video. What we're going to do is create the class-based feature. So this is an artisan command that you can execute. So it's PHP artisan Pennant feature, and then you give your feature a name. So what we're going to do here is we'll just copy this first part, and we're going to call this commercial API rate limit. And this is going to create a folder with an app. So you have app features. Now you have the feature that we created. And right now it doesn't have much, if anything, to really go off of. So what we're going to do here is we're going to adjust this to look at the user model. And then we're going to sit there and say if the user is a commercial customer, we're going to want to give them an API rate limit of 400. If not, we're going to fall back to 100. And I'm going to do this purposely because Laravel's rate limiter by default limits API calls to 60 per minute. So if you can imagine, let's say we have people that are not logged into a session. They're going to be limited to 60. But if you are logged in as a user, depending upon your commercial flag, you could either be set at 400 or 100. So you get a little bit of a bump just because you're a user. So now we have to kind of do a little bit of work here because in order to make the models aware, Pennant does come with it's essentially a trait that you can put on your model. It's called has features. So we're going to go add it here. And then now we're going to go and add it to the class. If you're ever curious to just drill down into this, all this does is it just sort of scopes the feature to the user. So that's kind of what we see here. So it's going into the database of features, and then it's saying for this specific model, which in our case is a user model. So we have that. And right now, we don't have anything in the database as of yet. And so what we're going to need to do now is we got to set up some API endpoints. So what we're going to do here, I'm going to create a route, and we'll just call this a login. And all I'm trying to do is get a user into their session. And just so that we're sure here, we do have one user record. So what we're going to do, we're just going to kind of hack the login. So we're going to say auth login using ID. We're going to use that first user. And then when we do this, because with, let's see here, with Sanctum, we're just going to open up a new tab here. I want to get the token that gets created. So let's see here, looking for, here we go, create token. So what we want to do is essentially when they log in, right, we're going to say auth user create token. We'll just give it a star value or an asterisk just for the sake of this demo. And if we go to Postman and I call this login route, you notice now we get some data here. So I'm going to take this bearer token that we get back. I'm going to put it into here. And what we're going to do, I need to create another endpoint. And we'll just call this we'll go with what I have here. We're just going to call this a limited endpoint. And we don't really care about what this gives us. So we just sit there and say status. We'll just call it status OK. However, we do need to apply this Sanctum middleware, so that way it'll authenticate the user against that bearer token that we provided. And then just so we know that this is getting called, I'm just going to make a little logging point that's called configure. We're just going to use the method name, right? So if we've done everything right, whenever we post to, we're going to post to that endpoint. We get status back OK. If we go into our log, we notice that it does indeed hit that logging point that we created. But remember, Laravel by default has 60. So what we now have to do is come up with a way to tap in to that value. Let's see here. So if we want to do this, so we'll just create a variable. We're just going to call it max attempts, right? And we're going to sit there and say if we do have a user, now we want to tap into that feature. Of course, we could actually do it like this. We could say user features, and then we would want the value of commercial API rate limit. And just so we kind of get an idea what the data is looking like when we do this, we're going to make another API call just so we can see what the logs look like. And you see it's spitting back 100. And what we can do now is, and what we probably should do just to make things a little simpler, we'll put this on a separate line. So that way we can say request user features, and then we're going to fall back to the 60. We'll pass that in here. And if we make another API call, everything should still work, and it does, which is good. So Now, the issue we're going to run into is if we look at the feature, you'll see it has 100. But remember, this is sort of going off that commercial value from the database. So what happens if we go and we adjust that value to say, let's say we want to set it to true, and we run another API call. When we go back to our database, you're going to see it still says 100. And it's because Laravel Pennant is doing its best to not have to make excessive database calls. So what we have to now is tell Laravel that, well, if that commercial property changes, we actually need to get rid of this feature record for this specific user. So that way upon the next request, it'll then reanalyze it. So the question is, well, how do we do this? And what we could do here is that we could create, we could create an observer. So we can say PHP artisan, if I can type, make observer. We're going to call it a user observer, and we're going to do it for our model. It's called user. And so what we want to do here is when the user has been updated, and I'm also going to kind of use the conditionable trait. So that way I can say this when we'll say the user, and we're going to look at which fields have changed, or they refer to that as dirty. We're going to look for the one that says commercial. We'll put this all on separate lines. Then we're going to have a closure that'll say user, and let's say, how about we call this reset rate limiter. And so we're going to end up having to add that to the user model. And so this is where we're going to go into our features, and we want to forget the commercial API rate limit. Now, of course, we still have to tell Laravel that we want to use this observer, and something that you can do is that you can go into your event service provider, and you can have a list of observers, and then you can sit there and say, I want the user model, and then I want that to point to the user observer. Make sure this imported. Didn't look like it did. Yeah, it didn't, which is fine. And just so that we know that the observer is getting called on the update, we're just going to do this. We'll just use the method magical constant here. And if I go back, and let's say now I set this back to false, we should have a log point that picks up the observer, and we do. And now, since that observer has been called, because note, we're telling it to reset that feature. If we go to the database, it's gone. So, of course, right now, if we go in, since it's going to be false, note it would be a value of 100. So we're going to call it, check the database, it says 100. We're going to go back, and now we're going to set it to true. And this will have reset that, which it has. Go back to Postman, run this again, and we should see a value of 400. And we do. And so just like that, we've told Laravel that anytime that commercial value changes, we're actually going to get rid of the feature so it can be reanalyzed. And the reason you could kind of see this coming into play is, let's say a user is already logged into their session, and let's say they then pay to upgrade, we'll say, their subscription with your service. You would then want to change the values of those features so that way they get the benefit of everything that they're paying for. Now, something else you can do is, you noticed how when we had the user log in, so if I go to my API, remember how we recreate that token? We can also do it here to where we'll grab that name. And we can even do this upon the login. Just in case, let's say there was a billing cycle that ran behind the scenes throughout the night and the person's, we'll say their subscription got downgraded. Well, we don't want them to still get those 400 API calls. So if, and what we'll do here we're going to set this to false, so that way it flushes it. But then we're going to go back and we want to log in again. We're going to get our new bearer token, put in the postman, run it, and we should see it say 100. And indeed it does. So hopefully this starts to give you an idea about what you can leverage Pennant to do. If you can imagine, if you have an e-commerce store, you might have a feature where a user could be offered, let's say, free shipping based on, let's say the volume of purchases they've made over the past 6 months. As you can imagine, you can get very, very granular with Pennant to even control the appearance of buttons. I mean, there's literally no limit to what you can achieve with this very, very amazing package. And so, like I said, this is video 1 of a series I'm going to do on this specific package. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, be sure to leave me a comment, a like. Be sure to share on social media. You can find me on Twitter at Jordan K. Dalton. You can find me on YouTube at DaltonCast. And if you want to see the other things I have going on, I have a Discord channel now for mentorship, which you can see those if you go to the link tree in my Twitter bio. So take care, everybody. I look forward to showing you this on the next video. Take care.